coming up in this episode, I will discuss why I'm rewriting a self-published novel and the steps involved. While we're on this topic, I also share my experience using a paid beta reader and how this entire experience has changed my writing and self-publishing process for the better. On top of this, I'm also going to discuss the results of my second Bargain Booksy promotion, so stay tuned. Welcome to Amelia's Behind the Scenes Author Diary, an exclusive look at the behind-the-scenes misadventures of a 30-something mystery author. Discover how close she is to releasing her latest novel, hear exciting details about upcoming writing projects, and discover the lessons she has learned along her writing journey so you don't have to make the same mistakes. You can find the episode show notes and lots more information at authorpreneurpodcast.com/podcast. Hello writers, I hope you are all well and are staying safe. It's official, I'm rewriting a self-published novel only a few months after its initial release, and that book is missing. In this episode, I'm going to share the steps I took to rewrite the novella and what I plan to do next. While we're on this topic, I also share my experience using a paid beta reader and how this entire experience has changed my writing and self-publishing process. To be honest, this is something I wished I did before I pressed publish. The book blogging tour for Missing started on Tuesday, the 28th of April, and I'll share the results I've received so far. In terms of book marketing, I hired beta readers through AuthorsXP and I've applied for a second Bargain Booksy promotion. So stay tuned for all of this and much more. Just to let you know, this episode was recorded on Tuesday, the 20th of October, so this show is primarily me looking back at April. In the same spirit as the previous episode, there is a backlog with the show due to the lockdown that we're all facing. After a few weeks, I've managed to figure out how to work from home with my husband and do all of the things I would typically achieve. If you're on YouTube, you'll notice that I've gone back to an audio-only version of the podcast. That's because of my hair situation. I know that's a vanity thing, but my hair has become too long and I can't just wear a cap and cover it up. So I'm sorry for the lack of video this week. Throughout this episode, I will be referencing tools and services that I've used. If you're interested in reading the transcript or would like the links to anything that I've mentioned in the show, then check out the very long blog post or edited transcript at authorpreneurpodcast.com/BTS031. And if you're new to this podcast, then I want to say a huge thank you for stopping by and trying out my show. To those of you who have been faithfully listening to my show, thank you for regularly listening in and supporting me. Your support means more to me than you know. At the moment, I'm attempting to catch up on the backlog of podcast episodes for both Thriller Novel Nerd and the Authorpreneur podcasts. I finally figured out how to film the video and record the audio at the same time, so I'm not doing two lots of recording and two lots of editing. And I've also come to the conclusion that I'm better off filming over the weekend. But until I catch up, I've devoted an entire weekday to recording the audio-only version of the podcast. Once I catch up, the balance between writing and podcasting will be easier to manage. In order to, foster a community around my podcast, I've decided to create a Facebook for each podcast, but I'm going to start with the Thriller Novel Nerd podcast and then branch out and then create a separate Facebook group for the Authorpreneur podcast. And you would have also, I'm guessing if you're a regular listener to the show, you would have noticed that I'm no longer reading from a script, that these episodes are me, talking from bullet points with long notes. And part of the reason why I originally scripted the episodes was it was just easier for me to stick to a script, and then I would use that script to create the long blog posts. But it's become like a crutch for me to the point where I can't record unless I have a full script. So I'm trying to wean myself off that, where the introductions are highly scripted, and then the body is the body of the podcast. Not body. I guess the the large portion of the content of the podcast, I will be talking from the top of my head, but from the bullet points. And the reason why I've got long notes on my bullet points is I don't want to waffle. I don't want to wander off track. I want to stick to the topics that I want to talk about, and I want to be short and to the point. I don't want to waste your time, which is why I decided to devote each episode to what I've achieved in a particular month. And then once I catch up to the end of October, it will change back to fortnightly, or maybe, it'll change back to fortnightly. And hopefully I'll have a lot of stuff to talk about in there. And if I don't, I will pivot and change it a little, but I'll keep you updated along the way. So back to the Thriller Novel Nerd podcast. At the moment, I'm getting ready to accept guests for that podcast. But unfortunately, I did upload a form and I made it really long. I made the form quite long with lots of questions to discourage people who were just looking for a quick and easy way to market their book. And I have had a few people express interest, but I don't particularly want to interview them about their books because a few of them their books are around topics that I know some people will find triggering. And I also want to keep the podcast free of books that are excessively violent or that talk about topics like suicide or overly violent crimes. And I also want to make sure that the people that I'm interviewing do have a backlog of books in the same genre in a series, and they also have professional covers. And unfortunately, that's not what I'm getting. I'm getting inundated with interview requests, and I'm going to have to take that down and find another way to find interviews with authors where it won't take up too much of my time trying to find or source the interviews, because I don't have a virtual assistant yet to sort of filter through and respond to everybody, if that makes sense. So I'm going to have to change the way that I've originally decided to source the interviews. I guess I'm back to the drawing board on that one. But in terms of filming the video and recording the audio at the same time, I'm using a program called Ecamm Live, which is linked with Skype to film, I guess, the visual side. Well, actually, I don't need Skype to film the video. I just need Skype to film the video portion of the interviews. And I can also just record using the camera of my iMac, but I don't think I will do that. I think I will use my mirrorless DSLR because the picture quality is going to be so much better than just I'm tempted to call it the iSight camera on my my iMac, but I have a funny feeling that's not what it's called anymore. They've had so many rebrands of their products and I'm confused. Maybe I'll either purchase a clip-on camera or use my mirrorless DSLR and hook it up. And at some point I will do a video and show you how I set everything up. Due to the panicked feelings I received after reading the Reezy Discovery review of my book, I decided to enlist the help of a paid beta reading service, and that service that I've used is Frostbite Publishing, and they have a paid beta reader. From memory, I think it was less than $50 for a book under 40,000 words. That is just an estimate. It is quite on the cheaper side. Perhaps it was £50 and the actual price in dollars was about $39 US. Maybe that sounds a little bit better. It was something close to that. It was quite cheap. I will list the price that I paid in the show notes in your favorite podcasting app. I paid for the service and I uploaded my books and I sent it off, and I was told there was going to be a bit of a wait due to lockdown because not all of their usual beta readers were able to read at this particular time for obvious reasons. So I waited, and it turned out there was only like a 3-week turnaround, which was pretty good. And I got 2 reports. I've got my manuscript back with inline comments, and then I got a report from the beta reader herself. So I ignored the inline comments because I really wasn't after critiques of my word choice or anything like that. I was more concerned about the plot, because the comments about the plot in that partially read review of my book Missing is what prompted me to use a paid beta reader. I read the report, and it turns out the beta reader actually pointed out a few minor plot holes that I overlooked that were not picked up by the Reads Discovery service, and this is because she didn't read the entire book but back to the paid beta reader. So I was like, oh, and I was a little shocked that no one, because it's been read quite a few times and no one had pointed this out to me. And after reading the report and seeing the plot holes, I became a little nervous because I have a book blogging tour that was due to start at the end of April, and I didn't have time to rewrite my book and then send it off because I think at the time it was due to start in like 10 days or something. So that made me incredibly nervous for the potential book reviews that I was going to receive. And because they're on blogs of well-known book bloggers, it was going to be there forever. So I was a little bit concerned, if that makes sense. Yes, I was a little concerned. And by a little, I mean a lot. By this time, I was super anxious and I was stressed out. And this is part of the reason why I really struggled to write. But back to the paid beta reading service by Frostbite Publishing. I am extremely happy with that service, and this is something that I plan on using again as a part of my normal publishing routine. Prior to receiving any feedback from Readsy or the beta reading service, I applied for a Bargain Booksy promo in advance for April the 20th, 8 days before the book blogging tour was going to begin, because I wanted to drive lots of traffic to my book. That was the plan. So let's get on and talk about the sales that I got as a result of this promotion. So the sales, I'm not even going to bother sharing the numbers because it really isn't spectacular. And I think part of the reason for this, looking back, is possibly because it's in the wrong genre. I did the promo for thrillers, and this book is really a whodunit mystery type of novel. And while those two genres are similar, they're also quite different. Thriller novels tend to be action-packed and they have a lot of page-turning moments, whereas a mystery is really about figuring out who committed the crimes or the murder before the sleuth or the amateur sleuth reaches the end of the book and figures it out for themselves. And the other reason why my sales weren't particularly spectacular could be because I have one book, no backlist, and at the time I had no reviews on Amazon. So in hindsight, I probably should have done this after the book blogging tour had finished. But as a result of this the Bargain Booksy promo, I received my first few page reads on Kindle Unlimited, which I was quite excited about, to see that someone was reading my book. And I was also nervous at the same time because during this period I was like, oh, I got a terrible book, and I was so nervous and on edge, and I was not in a great mind place at all. But if you do these promos like Bargain Booksy, I can see how being in Kindle Unlimited would actually help with the promotions. But in saying that, I think it would work well if you were publishing your books wide and you were using these promotions. But if you're publishing wide and doing a discount, you really do need a backlist of books in the same series. Otherwise, there's nothing for them to go on to. But the reason why I'm doing these book promotions is I'm hoping people are going to read my book and then leave a review. I'm really doing this in an attempt to get more reviews. So while I was waiting for the feedback from the paid beta reader who worked for Frostbite Publishing, I decided to curate my list of beta readers. And the way I chose to do this is I chose to use a paid service that helped me find people who were interested in beta reading my book. And I used a company called AuthorsXP.com. And so it was just, the payment was really just for the finding of the readers. And in and of itself, it's a really interesting idea. However, actually, it didn't quite work well for me. So what I did, the steps I took before I enlisted the services, I created a questionnaire, I crafted an email and sent it off, and I waited for feedback. The tragic thing about this is I received no feedback. So in essence, I've just given a free copy of my book away, and I've gotten no feedback to help me create that better second edition. Even today, I'm still waiting for people to read my book. I've actually cancelled the book funnel link, so they can't download my book anymore. But it's just a little disappointing. So I think with sites like this that promise to help you curate beta readers or send your book out for people to read, and if they liked it, review, I think you need to realize that there are a lot of freebie seekers and you may have to use a lot of these services to get a decent amount of reviews. While I am talking about AuthorsXP, I do feel like I have just really slammed them. But in terms of customer service, the lady who runs AuthorsXP is super friendly. She's helpful. She will reply back to your emails super quickly. And if she receives feedback from someone where someone says, I can't do this, she'll pass it on to you extremely quickly. It's just, she obviously can't make people read your book, if that makes sense. So just be aware that some of these services do have freebie seekers on them. So I reached the end. Actually, I think I enlisted this service at the beginning of April at the same time as the beta reader, because I was told from Frostbite Publishing it would take a while, but it didn't take as long as what they were saying it would. So I thought, okay, I'll do my beta readers as well. So I think it was at the beginning of the month. So I got towards the end of the month. I think it was during the second last week of April, I decided that I was just going to roll with the feedback that I received, because it was quite positive. Like, she liked the book, but she also said, actually, there's a few plot holes here that you need to address. So I just created the second edition purely on that one round of feedback. If you've heard something in this episode that was helpful to you and you'd like to support the show, then buy me a coffee for as little as £1 at buymeacoffee.com/author-ADH. Based on the feedback that I've received, I decided to create a second edition of Missing. So this second edition required minor rewrites to the plot. And at the time when I first started the second edition of Missing, I had considered renaming the book and relaunching it and doing a complete relaunch. And to be honest, I may still decide to rename and completely relaunch Missing, but all of that is really dependent upon the reviews I receive between now and when I publish the second book in the series. So I am still reserving the right to relaunch that book. Because this is the first book in a series, I think it's important to get this book right, because readers may not want to read book 2 and the rest of the series if they're not happy with this book. There are limits to the changes I will make to this book, because I can't change the ending. The ending of Missing is written the way that it has because the characters in this series are also a part of another series. And I sort of wrote myself in a corner, and I realised the ending I wanted to give the book wasn't the ending I could give it. I had to change it and give it a bit of a bittersweet ending so these characters could go on and continue on in this other series that I planned on writing in the future. So that's one thing about it that I won't change. But I still want to tie up the loose ends and smooth out the plot issues. And I realised that by creating a second edition and potentially doing other editions in the future, that I'm pouring more money into creating book 1. And there's a part of me that's okay with that, because I've accepted that book 1 of the James Lon series will be a loss leader, full stop. And I've designed it that way. I do want to discount this book or give it away for free eventually. Maybe not free. I do plan on selling this book at 99 cents. Once I have other books available in this series, I may not break even on this series, but that's purely taking into account only the sales for book 1. But where I will make money will be read through. People reading the other books in the series and potentially this other series as well if they're intrigued enough by the characters in the first book. I managed to rewrite the second edition of Missing over 5 days in April. So on day 1, which was the 8th of April, I added an extra 601 words to the second edition. These additional words were highlighted in red just so I could see what I've changed and in what particular scenes or chapters. On day 2, which was the 15th of April, I planned the edits for the rest of the book, and I made minor edits to a few scenes which resulted in an additional 5 words added on to the word count. So when I went through and I made these minor edits, it was me adding in things and taking stuff away. And if you added up all the changes I made, it resulted in an extra 5 words. But it took me like a good sort of 3 to 4 hours to go through and make those edits, because there's a lot of reading and rereading and thinking about how it sounds when it's read out loud and a lot of stuff like that. And every time I make an edit on a scene, I then put that scene through ProWriting 8 and Grammarly and sort of do my own line edit with those programs. So on day 3, this was a few days after I received the feedback from the professional beta reader. So that was on the 24th of April. I made minor edits to 9 scenes, which resulted in creating an additional 494 words. On day 4, which was the 25th of April, I wrote beats and made scene blocking notes for a new scene. And then I had to go through and think about what this location would look like. And it was a 1-bedroom apartment belonging to one of the characters. So I had to imagine what that would look like. And then I got lazy and decided to search a real estate site called Zoopla, and I found a property rental in the area where the book is located. And I thought this is actually the type of place that this particular character would live in. So I sort of used that as inspiration. I made a few changes, and this sort of helped me with the scene blocking and writing the beats for this new scene. On day 5, which was the 27th of April, I wrote the new scene, performed the line edits, and this resulted in an extra 590 words. On this same day, I also contacted 2 editors for quotes, and I decided to go with a different editor for the second edition for the sake of having a different set of eyes on it. And the editor is also tailoring the experience to my book. So I submitted a sample for a line edit. I chose the new scene that I added into Missing as the sample because it was unedited, and I went through and explained that the edits that I made affected these particular chapters and scenes, and I highlighted the new words in red, and anything that was changed but only in a minor way or reworded, I highlighted it in green just so she could see what was changed. And she got back to me and said that she would do a proofread because the changes I made affected so little of the book. But these moments that I changed were actually important, and I didn't resolve these things or didn't answer these questions, so it was important that I made the second edition. So as I was thinking about creating a second edition of my mystery novella Missing, I found a few websites that were extremely helpful as I was thinking about doing this and then actually doing the rewrites. And the first one was a discussion thread on Kboards about rewriting a published novel, and I will link that particular thread in the show notes and on the blog post just for those of you who are thinking about doing this as well, because I actually found this extremely helpful. And also have another 2 blog posts from a blog called Writers Write, and they were blog posts dedicated to, I guess it was like it's a post on, it's called 106 ways to describe sounds, and the second one is 75 words that describe smells. And with these extra scenes, I wanted to make sure that I didn't forget about how the room smelt, or I didn't forget about these extra senses. I wasn't just describing the visual things, I was describing how things smelt and sounded as well within the scene. And I found these 2 blog posts really helpful, and even as I've gone on to write other things, I've definitely come back and still look at these blog posts. So I'll leave these links in the show notes and on the blog post as well. Now that I'm here talking about this, I do feel it might be beneficial for me to create an entire episode of the author diary where I do talk about exactly what I did, the exact step-by-steps in extreme detail about how I created this second edition and how I decided that. So if you do want me to go into greater detail, like a good 20-minute discussion on how to know if you do need to write a second edition and the steps you need to go through in order to make the decision, and then the intricate steps you need to take to rewrite, then let me know by leaving a comment on the blog post as to whether you are interested in hearing or listening to an episode purely devoted to rewriting a novel. Even though I only added an extra roughly 2,000 words to the second edition of Missing, I do actually call it a second edition purely because the changes are made to the plot and they tie up loose ends. So I do warrant that as a second edition, but if it was just minor tweaks, I would not have called it a second edition. I would have just changed it and put it back out there. And that's sort of what I did. Actually, I think in the next episode, I will actually talk about what I did after I received the edits and then going on to pressing publish. But I actually did those tasks in May. So in the next podcast episode, which will be coming around quite quickly for you, I will talk about the actual pressing publish on a second edition and the choices I made. So now that I've had this experience, I have made a few changes to my writing, revision and publishing process for the better. So my new writing process will look a little something like this. So the first stage is creating the idea for the story. The second stage is outlining. The third stage is writing that first draft. The fourth stage is revision. The fifth stage is using a professional beta reader. The sixth stage is line editing. And the final stage is proofreading. In between the professional beta reading and the line editing, I will perform rewrites. I think for the sake of clarity, I will probably label these as third draft and fourth draft, and maybe fifth draft for the changes that need to be made for after the proofreading. But usually those have been quite minor, especially for missing. So that's what my new writing process looks like. Obviously, I won't get to try that out. Yes, I will actually. I will use a professional beta reader as well as regular beta readers, but I'll talk about that in a later episode. So during the month of April, I started working on an idea for a first novel in a cozy mystery series to give myself a break from missing and the dramas from the previous 30 days. I originally started working on this idea way back in October 2018, but I ended up shelving the idea and focusing on missing. So I started fleshing out the story idea into the essential story structure scenes. After this, I started researching how to write a cozy mystery and the tropes of the genre purely because I wanted to write this particular series to market. After completing all of that research, I started fleshing out how the crime occurred, character motivations, and started to build a loose timeline of the events that unfolded in the story. At the moment, I have a 2-body murder mystery. So one body is found in the inciting incident, which is in the first 10% of the story, and the next body is found at the midpoint of the story, around the midpoint area. This series will have even less gore than the fade to black gore that's in my James Lalonde thriller series. But as it's been pointed out in reviews, apparently I have a lot of blood in there, but I don't know. I wouldn't consider it a lot of blood. So I guess it's about what you define as a lot. In the process of outlining this cozy mystery, I created 2 timelines, one for the amateur sleuth and the other for the villain. I then went and fleshed out all of the other character profiles and researched on why people commit murder. After I was clear on why people do what they do in terms of what brings them to actually commit a crime like murder, I then went out and fleshed out the events leading up to the crime, the first crime. So that's where I got to at the end of April for this cozy mystery series. Due to my experiences after launching Missing, I decided to write book 2 slowly. And I think that's because I've just really been struggling, and as you can see, I've been writing a lot of different things and working on a lot of different projects, and my mind space wasn't in a very particular good place, especially for writing the next book in the series. I was just so insecure about my writing, and I still am a little bit. My confidence really has been shattered. It's definitely a good way to describe my level of confidence in my own writing. Not that I thought I was particularly amazing. I didn't think that I was a great writer, but now I just think I'm like the worst writer on earth. It's just how I feel, and I can't shake it, and also can't stop reading my reviews. I need to stop doing that. But anyway, back on topic. So I decided to work on book 2 slowly. In terms of progress that I've made so far, Act 1 has been revised and read by my alpha reader, and I want to go back and add a new scene at the beginning, but I haven't written this yet. I've just got an idea. So in terms of writing days, I only had 1 writing day this month for book 2. So that day consisted of me researching the optic nerve and the parts of the eye and including how to remove an eyeball. I know that's disgusting. I realised that as I researched that the optic nerve isn't as long as what I assumed it would be, because what the optic nerve does is it connects the eyeball to your brain. So it isn't meters long. It's only a few centimeters long. So now that I know that, I had to make a minor adjustment to a scene in regards to a incorrect description of anatomy, and that really bothered me. So it was something that I definitely wanted to change. I guess now that I've said that, I've realised, there is a bit of gore in the James Bond series, and she is right, there is a bit of blood, but I don't go into gory detail about what it looked like. There is blood, and I do reference it. As a result of this research, I ended up adjusting the timeline for book 2 because I realised I needed to give the character a little more time to carry out the tasks they were performing in the scene. So not only do I want the description to be realistic, but also the time in which people do things. I want that to have a certain level of realism as well. The book blogging tour for Missing commenced on the 28th of April. This service started just at the right time and temporarily restored my faith in me writing the James Bond series. So far, I've received positive reviews where people have either given me 4 or 5 stars and have genuinely enjoyed the book. And there are other people who have written blog posts, but they didn't actually point out the star rating they gave me, but it seemed positive. But however, not everyone has loved my book, and that's to be expected. I know of at least 2 negative reviews that are coming my way because one blogger added a 2-star review on Amazon and cross-posted it to Goodreads, and another gave my book a 2-star rating on Goodreads. And I've started to save the positive reviews that I've received as screenshots in a folder on my desktop to help me. But in saying that, when I have moments when I'm struggling with my confidence with this series, I don't go and look at them and I rationalize my negative or pessimistic point of view with this series. And it's really interesting that you can have all of the things prepared for when you do get negative feedback. And for some reason, my mind, it's easier for me to believe something pessimistic than positive. I obviously need to work on that. On Twitter, I did reply back to all of the book bloggers and thank them for their reviews, with the exception of one person, and she didn't tag me in the review. That was at the beginning of May, and I will talk about that in the next podcast episode. I know that's super frustrating, but I'm trying to keep these podcast episodes to the month where I'm reflecting on and not messing up the timeline because it's going to get confusing. And I've mentally prepared for these negative book reviews only because I know it's coming my way. I will go into more detail in that in the next podcast episode because it's a really fascinating experience and it does deserve its own section to talk about it because it's a bit of a mind puzzler. The book blogging tour service that I used was arranged by Sarah Hardy, and her website it's called On the Bright Side. I will leave a link to the website in the blog post and in the show notes of your favorite podcasting app. The one thing I will say about this service is Sarah is such a pleasure to work with. She's very sweet and easy to get on with, and I will definitely be using this service again in the future, but I might have to maybe talk to her about a couple of maybe unpleasant experiences that I had and sort of see what she says about that. So that's all of the tasks I completed in terms of writing, book marketing, and email marketing. During the next month, I wanted to direct my focus back to rewriting book 2, announcing its title to my email list and on social media, and relaunching the 2nd edition of Missing. Next week, I will release another diary episode where I will continue to discuss my writing and book marketing endeavours. If you have any questions or tips on book marketing that you would love to share with me, please come on over to the blog post at authorpreneurpodcast.com/BTS031 and share your thoughts in the comments section under the blog post. Thank you for listening and happy reading and writing, everybody. Thank you for listening to Amelia's Behind the Scenes Author Diary. You can find the episode show notes, back catalogue episodes, and lots more information at authorpreneurpodcast.com/podcast. I'm your host, Amelia, and I'll see you in the next Behind the Scenes Author Diary episode.